All right, so today we're diving into this fascinating conversation with Charles Eisenstein. He was talking with Andre Ducombe. And you know that phrase, we're all connected? We hear that everywhere, right?
Right.
But what if we told you there's a whole other story out there, like a dominant narrative that really shapes how our world works, and it's built on this idea of separation?
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to unpack in this deep dive.
It's not just some, abstract philosophy either.
Yeah.
Like this idea, this story of separation, it gets to the core of how we live, how we think, even just picturing yourself, like right now existing, or you alone in that picture. It's kind of simple,
Yeah.
but it reveals how deeply ingrained this whole separation thing really is.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit.
Mm,
What exactly do we mean by the story of separation, and why should we even care?
yeah. So Charles Eisenstein, he argues that this story, it's this belief that we humans are like fundamentally separate from nature and separate from each other.
Hmm.
And this separation, he says, it leads to needing to be in control, wanting to dominate, and this constant competition. We see it everywhere, right? From how we treat the environment to how we treat each other.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
instead of seeing ourselves as part of this larger web of life, we're almost like these separate little islands just trying to
You thought
just trying to make it on our own.
And those islands have consequences,
Yeah.
Like, think about it. Big technological advancements, we think they're supposed to make things better. Agriculture, the internet, they've actually deepened that separation in a lot of ways.
That is fascinating. It's like we view technology as this way to connect, but it can also be isolating, right? It can separate us even more from nature and even each other.
Precisely. Look at agriculture. It's separated us from the wild. Suddenly there's domesticated and then there's everything else, right?
Oh.
Then industry comes along. Even more distance between us and the natural world. And now, digital age plugged into these virtual realities, more detached from actual experiences, actual connection.
It's like this longing for connection never really goes away, though, almost like we know something's missing, you know?
It's like a genetic nostalgia almost. Eisenstein, he talks about this nostalgia for a time when humans just felt more a part of things. Interconnectedness wasn't an idea, it was just life. He even went through this period of like deep despair over it, almost a grief for that lost connection.
It's interesting, he doesn't shy away from those difficult emotions. That makes his message more powerful in a way.
He doesn't just dwell on the problems, though. He reframes them. He talks about how this whole journey into separation is like a stage, part of a larger process of exploration and return.
So we face challenges in our own lives,
Right.
right? And we can come out stronger, more resilient. Maybe this plunge into separation as a species, it serves a purpose in how we evolve.
Yeah. We had to experience the full spectrum of consequences to really get it, to get how important it is to return to that place of interconnectedness. And we need to do it now. Like it's urgent.
It's always like losing your way to find your way back, but on this huge global scale.
Exactly.
So we're seeing how this story of separation plays out in the world, but how about in our own lives? Like how we each think about making change happen.
Okay, well, this is where it gets really practical. See, Eisenstein says this story of separation, it doesn't just shape what we believe, it shapes how we try to change things. He uses this analogy of a Newtonian view of change. It's really interesting.
Okay, Newtonian, like physics and all that.
Exactly. So in physics, to make something happen, you often need force,
Right.
right? But when we try to apply that same idea to like social change or political change, it gets messy.
Because it becomes about overpowering the other side.
Yeah, and it creates this us versus them kind of thinking. It's like we forget we're not the only intelligence at work in the universe.
So instead of this constant struggle for control, what if we acknowledged that larger intelligence you're talking about and aligned ourselves with that? How would our approach to change be different then?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to be exploring as we go deeper into this conversation. How do we move from separation to this interbeing?
Yeah.
It's not like flipping a switch.
It's definitely not. It feels like it would require this like fundamental shift, changing how we see everything, the world, ourselves, our place in it, all of it.
You're exactly right. And it's not just about understanding it in your head. It's about feeling it, experiencing it. Which brings us to some fascinating stuff.
So this shift in perspective, this move towards interbeing, it's not just about thinking differently, is it? How do we actually make it real, make it something we feel?
That's where it gets really interesting. Eisenstein, he talks about this thing he calls embodied knowing. It's like, yeah, you can understand something in your head, but to really know it, you have to feel it in your body, your whole being.
It's like reading about riding a bike versus actually getting on one and feeling the wind. Right.
Exactly. And he says there are these simple things we do all the time that can be so powerful for cultivating that feeling of connection, like walking barefoot, really feeling the ground under your feet, or listening to birdsong, not just hearing it, but like really listening, like it's this whole symphony of nature.
Those things seem so small, though, especially when we're talking about these big issues.
Right. But those small things, they're like a portal. They help us get out of our heads and into our bodies, into the experience of being alive. And when we start to feel connected in that way, it changes how we interact with everything around us.
You know, that reminds me of that story Eisenstein tells about the mother at the playground.
Oh, yeah, with the kid, right?
Yeah, could you remind us about that?
So he sees this mother, and she's being really hard on her kid, and he gets that feeling like, oh, man, should I say something? Should I step in? But instead of reacting out of that judgment, that separation, he goes up to her and just says, having one of those days, huh?
So simple.
Right. But just that acknowledgement, that little offering of connection, it totally changed the whole energy.
Yeah.
It's like by seeing her struggle, he created this space for understanding, for compassion.
It reminds me that sometimes the smallest actions are the most powerful. You know, those little shifts in how we see things, they might not change the whole world, but they can make a difference.
Exactly. And that actually leads to another important part of what Eisenstein's talking about. We don't do this alone, this whole shifting to a new way of being.
So it's not about like going off and meditating on a mountaintop to reach enlightenment.
Not at all. It's about realizing that how we transform ourselves is connected to how we transform our communities and even the world around us.
He talks about finding your people, right?
Yes. Finding the others who get it, who are also trying to live from this place of inner being. Because it's easy to slip back into old habits when you're surrounded by the old story.
It can feel like you're swimming upstream.
Totally. But when you find your people, the ones who share those stories, it strengthens you, reminds you you're not alone.
It's like a safety net to catch you when you fall. And we all fall, right?
Exactly. And it's not just other people either. It's recognizing that the natural world, it sustains us too. It reminds us that we're connected, all of us.
It's like when you're in nature, really in it, surrounded by trees, feeling the wind, it's hard to feel alone then.
Right. Eisenstein says it again and again. We are not separate from nature. We are a part of it. And in those moments of deep connection, we can tap into this whole other way of knowing, this wisdom that gets drowned out by everything else.
So we have to feel our way there, not just think our way there.
You got it. And this is where it gets even more interesting, because this shift toward inner being, it's not just some nice idea. It changes how we deal with the very real problems we're facing today.
And we are facing some huge problems, right? Climate change, social unrest, political divisions. It feels like the stakes have never been higher. So how does this idea of being connected help us deal with all of that?
Now that's a question we're going to get into as we keep going.
So we're facing these huge problems, like you said, and you're saying this whole inner being thing, this connection, it can actually help us deal with all that.
Well, it's not like a magic answer, but it gives us a different way of looking at these crises, and maybe a way to find solutions that actually last. See, when we think we're separate from nature, it's easy to exploit it, to ignore the damage we're doing.
Right, like it doesn't really affect us.
Exactly. But when we realize we're connected to it all, when we see that harming the planet is harming ourselves, well, that changes things.
Our priorities change.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it expands our circle of concern, right? Like, if we only care about ourselves, our own little bubble, our actions are going to be limited. But the more we see the big picture, the interconnectedness of it all, the more compassion we can have, the more responsibility we feel.
We start to understand that we're not just individuals, we're part of something so much bigger.
Exactly. And this is where Eisenstein brings up another really crucial point about these crises we're facing. He says, yeah, they're disruptive and painful and scary, but they can also be opportunities, like a chance to transform things.
Because they shake us up.
Yes. They force us to confront the cracks in our systems, to see that some of the choices we've been making, they're just not sustainable.
It's like they force us to wake up.
Yeah, like that. And he uses the pandemic as an example. It was awful, so much suffering.
It was.
But it also forced us to look at how fragile things are, how interconnected everything is. The decisions we make, both as individuals and as a society, they have consequences.
It definitely showed us the cracks in the system. But it also brought out a lot of good, right? Acts of kindness, people coming together to help each other.
Absolutely. Even though it pushed things in a negative direction too, like more isolation, more dependence on technology. It also reminded us how much we crave that connection with each other, that sense of belonging, that we're in this together. It forced us to start asking, what kind of world do we actually want?
So it's like we're at a crossroads, the old story, the separation story. It's brought us to this point, but it's also created the space for something new.
Yes. And the big question is, what will that new story be?
What will we choose to create?
Right. And Eisenstein's clear on this. We need to change the systems, the political structures, the economic models, but none of that will stick without a shift in consciousness first.
So it has to start with us, with each of us.
Exactly. Recognizing that our choices matter. The stories we tell ourselves, they matter. How we show up every day, all of it matters.
So we're not waiting for someone else to fix it.
No, it's on us, each one of us, which is both empowering and kind of terrifying. He doesn't pretend it's easy, but he also says, don't give in to despair, to overwhelm. Because every act of kindness, every time we choose connection over separation, every choice we make that aligns with our values, it all makes a difference. We're weaving a new story bit by bit, action by action.
It reminds me of that quote. I can't remember who said it, but it's something like, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
I love that.
Yeah, it's that reminder that we don't need permission to make a difference. It's happening all the time, in the everyday moments, the small choices, the ways we interact with each other, and the world around us.
And the best part is, anyone can do it. You don't need a big platform or a fancy degree. It's about showing up with an open heart, a willingness to connect, and just living your values.
That's kind of radical when you think about it.
It is. It's like an act of rebellion in a world that's constantly trying to divide us.
So how do we cultivate that? That radical love, that fierce compassion?
It starts with remembering who we really are. We're not separate. We're connected to each other, to this planet, to something much greater than ourselves. And when we remember that, really embody it, that's where the magic happens. That's when we find the courage to challenge the status quo, to imagine a different kind of future, and to start creating it.
It's a beautiful vision.
It is. And the exciting part is, it's not just a dream. It's possible, right here, right now. And it starts with each of us. Choosing connection, challenging the old story, and weaving a new one. A story that celebrates our interconnectedness, our shared humanity, and the infinite potential that exists when we come together.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just along for the ride, we're active participants, we're co-creators of the future. And yeah, the road ahead might be bumpy, might be uncertain, but we don't have to walk it alone. We have each other. And we have this incredible web of life that connects us all. And if we can remember that, really feel it in our bones, then we can face whatever comes our way. And we can create a world that reflects the beauty, the wisdom, and the love that's always been there, waiting for us to remember.